Professor Tim Ogden is the Managing Director of the Financial Access Initiative, a research center housed at New York University, Wagner. FAI, as its short form is known, is focused on finding out how financial services can better meet the needs and improve the lives of low-income households. He is the principal investigator for this study, and he leads the global study. As you're going to find out, it's a global study. And Professor Ogden is going to give us an overview of the study. He will be followed by our very own Dr. Amrik Heya, the Senior Research Advisor at FSD Kenya, who is spearheading the Small Farms Diary study in Kenya. So Amrik is going to give us more details on the Kenyan chapter of the study. And so right now, I'd like to welcome Professor Tim Ogden to give us his remarks. Professor Ogden, you have about 20 minutes or just about 25 minutes. Yeah, 25 minutes, that would be enough. Over to you, Professor Ogden.
Great, thank you, Fred. And greetings to everyone. So glad that I could be here joining you from the East Coast of the United States this morning. Looking forward to a time when we can have a similar policy workshop towards the end of the study in person there in Kenya. I'm going to spend some time walking you through, as Fred said, the global study, the genesis of why we're doing this and how it works on a global basis before turning things over to Amrik to talk more specifically about our approach in Kenya. So I'm going to share a screen here. As you can see, we pay attention to these details on microfinance globally. If any of you were reading through what you saw on the screen, that is about the similar challenge of developing financial services for small firms in the United States. But as I was saying, in the process of thinking about low-income households, you come to understand how important small firms are to the economic lives, both in terms of the services and goods and services they offer in the neighborhoods that they operate, but also their role in providing employment to households that are not necessarily well attached to the formal labor market. We were founded by Jonathan Morduck, who is still the executive director, and you see some of our team there that I'm sure you'll encounter during the course of the study. As mentioned, this is a global project. We are particularly partnered with two organizations that specialize in conducting financial diaries studies in low-income countries. Microfinance Opportunities, and joining us today is Guy Stewart, who is the Executive Director of MFO, and LIFT, or Low Income Financial Transformation. Anne-Marie Van Swinderen is the director there. And together we collaborate on the execution of this globally. You can see our advisory board is made up of experts on small firms, and both from the public sector, the private sector, and research. And the funding for this study has come from a pretty broad variety of funders who are recognizing how important small firms are to broader questions of inclusive growth, development, and fighting poverty. So as you can see from this slide, we are conducting the Small Firm Diaries in 7 different countries around the world: Colombia, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, Indonesia, and Fiji, using the funds from a variety of sources. The Kenya diaries specifically are funded in partnership with FSD Kenya. The diaries, and I'll go into this a bit more, involves data collection for a year. And so with such an ambitious global project, we began first in Ethiopia and Colombia. We're about 6 months into diaries collection in Ethiopia, about 4 months in Colombia, 2 months in Nigeria, and getting ready to start in Kenya. And shortly we'll be beginning our work in Indonesia and Fiji and Uganda. The big picture, we are going to, in each of these countries, recruit 100 to 150 small firms. I'll come back to our definition of small firms exactly in a moment, and follow them with this diaries methodology, collecting high frequency data for a full year in the hopes of really understanding better what happens inside these small firms. This is an area that's largely been neglected with detailed research in the academic and research literature because gathering data on them is quite hard. There are many, many of them. They operate in a wide variety of industries and areas. And some of them are formal, some of them are informal. They vary in size. They come and go on a fairly frequent basis. And there's a lot of transactions, a lot of money is flowing through them, if not a large volume at any one particular point in time, collectively and through flows. And so the work of going to find these firms and follow them is quite expensive and difficult. And so as a consequence, it's been something of a hole in the research literature. Well, people have acknowledged that they are important. They've also acknowledged that we just don't know that much about them. And so because we are a research center that's focused on these questions of helping households escape poverty and increase growth at the lower end of the income spectrum, we realized we had to fill in this gap because a lot of the hopes and dreams of the microfinance sector in terms of spurring growth and lifting people out of poverty were not seeing their realization. That the hope was that those micro enterprises would grow to become small firms that employed many people, and we're just not seeing that action. There's been some effort then to figure out how to better target or better design microfinance products focused at micro enterprises to help them grow without sort of really dealing with the question of the fact that as far as we can tell, many of the firms that already have 2, 5, 10 employees are not growing either. And so it really raises the question of, even if we can design products that help a micro enterprise go from 0 to 3 employees, will they grow thereafter? And we need those firms to grow if they're going to provide more employment and better employment. We also know that these firms are important in the lives of women. Many women operate small firms like this, but we know that they are at the margins of financial inclusion. And we know that this sector is changing rapidly because of digitization. And that's a particular challenge to figure out how to address how digitization will work with these firms if we don't understand the firms in the first place. And so we aim with this research to fill those critical knowledge gaps, to really understand how these businesses function, where they came from, where they get their capital from, what's their asset stock, and how is that financed, and how is that informing the goals and aspirations of the business? How important is growth to the business owners? All of these sorts of important questions we need to answer so that we can develop better products for those firms. And I'll speak some more about that a little bit later. And how can we inform policymakers, particularly in designing policies that are useful and helpful to these firms and helping them achieve their goals, employ more people, raise wages, and contribute to growth and development in their economies. So always when you're talking about firms like this, there is this big question of what do you mean when you say MSE, MSME, small, medium, micro? And so we are particularly using the word small firms, which is not, in fact, the state of the art, to refer to who we're focused on, because the terminology is so varied from location to location and over time, whether micro refers to firms with no employees or up to 15 employees in some definitions. Is small include no employees, or is small further? And so we settled on small firms so that we had very close control of our definitions. And so we define a small firm as a firm that has hired an employee outside of their household up to 20 employees. And the reason we're really especially focused in that area is we know from general research that firms that have employees are different from firms that do not have employees, and that most firms that start with 0 employees never gain any employees. The micro firms with 0 employees, very rarely ever hire an employee. So most employment growth comes from firms that already have employees. So we thought it was important to, we need to understand these firms that are already employing people. And we also know from general research that firms that have hired professional managers, people whose only job is to manage other employees, are quite different from firms that are still entirely run and managed by the owner. And so we hypothesized that this size from 1 to 20 employees is the size of those firms that are in this range. They have not hired professional managers, but they do have employees. And that's this segment that we really, really want to understand, because we don't understand very much about them. They are formal, or some of them are formal, some of them are informal. Some of them have 1 employee, some of them are much more sophisticated. Some of them essentially have no assets. Some of them have significant assets and property. And so we are looking across that range of firms, but you're really focused on this group that has the ability potentially to hire a significant number of additional workers and can improve their businesses significantly, if we can understand what the barriers to that growth, particularly in employment, are. I do want to come back to a question that came up in the chat about how we selected the countries where we're operating in. That the country selection was largely driven by our funders. For instance, Nigeria, Uganda, and Indonesia are funded by the Gates Foundation because those are focus countries for that foundation. MasterCard provided the initial funding to get us started with a particular focus on Latin America and East Africa, and that's where Ethiopia and Colombia came from. The Fiji project is funded by the Australian National University, which has a program specifically for conducting research in the South Pacific. And as I mentioned, FSD Kenya is the primary funder for the Kenyan arm of the work. So it wasn't we looked across the world to find the most important countries to do this research in, but we looked around the world for the sources of funding for us to be able to conduct what is, quite a difficult and lengthy and expensive process to be able to answer these questions. Now, what we're extremely pleased by is the diversity of different countries that we have. And so we do think the study will have particular resonance around the world, because between Colombia, Fiji, Indonesia, Kenya, we're representing a lot of different contexts, culturally, policy-wise, and development-wise, so that we'll be able to draw lessons from across those and speak to the questions of small firms around the world. So moving on to this question of why, if this is so difficult and expensive, if other people have found it too hard to do this research, why is it so important to better understand small firms? And as Fred and Tamara and Anne referenced already this morning, small firms are particularly important to the economic prospects of many of the households that we care about most. Globally, these types of small firms, again, we have a problem of definition. It's hard to get to, specific statistics for the segment that we're focusing on. But in general, we can see that about 96% of employment in low-income countries and 88% of that employment in lower middle-income countries is coming in firms in the micro, small, and medium size. That varies country to country, but by and large, for the households who are in the lower half of the income distribution, someone in the household is shopping at, working for, supplying to, or owning a small firm like this. And that they remain a really critical gap of information. So let me then take a step back to say, how are we going to then learn about these firms? We're going to learn about these firms by using this Diaries approach that was pioneered including in Kenya, with households, to better understand how low-income households really manage their finances by looking at their data in a high-frequency way. So rather than assuming that what you saw in terms of income and expenditure over a year told us all that we needed to know about those households, we needed to see the cash flows. When did money come in? When did it go out? How did it arrive? How was it handled? How was it moved through time? And the household financial diaries have been critical to really understanding and designing policies and programs for low-income households. The Financial Access Initiative was involved in the original financial diary study that took place in South Africa and Bangladesh and India, and in the US financial diaries, where we followed low-income households in the US in a similar manner. And that work inspired the Kenya Financial Diaries, the Corner Shop Diaries. There's many diary studies that have since been undertaken. So we're adapting that same approach, thinking that if we are going to understand these firms, we really do need to understand the cash flows with a high frequency. But the other power of the financial diaries methodology is not just that it's quantitative, is in the process of gathering this high frequency cash flow data, you really get to know the participants in the study and can ask them lots and lots of qualitative questions, not just about what money came in, when, and from where, but why it came in and why it went where it did and how the person involved in the study is making decisions. And you get to see choices. So not just in hindsight where you say, well, why did you make this investment or why didn't you make that investment? You get to see the firm or the household at the moment the choice is being made and see what their real options were. And that gives you a much deeper understanding of the quantitative side of data that you're gathering. So throughout the study, not only are we visiting the firms weekly to track all the money in and money out, but we're also going to be asking the firm owners many questions about the operation of their business, the firm history, their exposure to risk and shocks, their relationships with employees, the wages they pay, how they decide those wages, their business practices, their record keeping, their aspirations, et cetera, and so forth. I mentioned a variety of the financial diaries that have been done, and we've covered this ground of the uniqueness of the small firm diaries because of our focus on this group of firms that has this type of firm that has not been a major focus of a lot of other research similarly. From there, I want to go into the kinds of questions that we're going to be studying in our work. So as I mentioned, overall, the big picture is what is the role of these small firms in low-income communities and households? And what role can they play in accelerating growth and reducing poverty? So, at the baseline of this then is saying these firms are employing a lot of people, providing a lot of economic activity. And if we want to generate more income for households that are in the orbit of these firms, then we need to create more jobs in these firms. So then we need to understand how these firms operate so that we can figure out what are the barriers to their growth and design policies and programs that allow them to grow. And so, part of that comes back to the very basics is, what is a firm? And that may sound like a kind of a crazy question, but from the economics perspective, there is this question of where the boundaries of the firm are. How distinct is the firm from the household of the owner? How important is the firm in the economic lives of the employees of that firm? How is that firm managed on a day-to-day basis? How do these firms invest? Where does the money come for them to start up from? Are they exclusively started by wealthier households who have the income to sort of buy the initial assets? Or are some of them, growing from micro into small and on? When they make those decisions to invest, how do they choose what it is that they're doing? Is it simply a question of existing relationships, or do they identify opportunities that are unfilled in the market that they can fill? Which really speaks to what drives small firm owners. We do focus a great deal on how do we help these firms grow, but an important part of growth is, does the firm owner want the firm to grow? And we see that is one of the issues in microenterprise, is that many of the microenterprises, the firm owners don't really want to grow into small firms. The microenterprise is a substitute for employment. And their dream, their hope, their aspiration is to get regular employment in another firm. And so they're not making investments to grow. When we come to these small firms that are already employing people, we do have a similar question. What are the growth goals of these firms? And are they frustrated by lack of access to various resources? Or are they frustrated by other other factors. Another one of our key questions is, who are the employees of these firms? As I mentioned, in what role do the employees play in the firms? What do the markets they serve look like? What are the possibilities for them to grow because of access to markets? And of course, how do the firms grow and change over time? I mentioned we're following up with a lot of qualitative questions. This is just an overview of a lot of the themes that we're going to be following through the study, trying to better understand the internal operations of the firm, how they use their time, who their competition is. We will be interviewing suppliers to the firms and employees to better understand the relationships that happen there. As has been mentioned, we're focused also on the role of gender in these small firms. We have a cohort of women-owned firms so that we can compare them with male-led counterparts and better understand the challenges and barriers that women face. Looking at managerial skills and how they run their firms and what are the gaps that potentially can be closed there. Across the global study, and I'm going to go into more detail for Kenya. As I mentioned, we're recruiting 100 to 150 firms in 2 to 4 sites in each country. The site location has to do with both what's relevant to the policy situation in the country, but also, I mentioned this is difficult and expensive work to do. So we do have to find places where there's a density of small firms within our sample, within a relatively small geographic area, so that our surveyors can efficiently reach the small firms. We're also focusing on 3 particular industries everywhere around the world: light manufacturing, agri-processing, and some specific parts of the services sector. And this is a choice that comes back to the idea of why we're doing the research in the first place, in terms of helping small firms grow and employ more people, pay higher wages, pay more wages, and contribute to growth in lifting people out of poverty. And therefore, since we couldn't cover everything, we decided we needed to focus the research on particular sectors where employment growth was plausible within sort of the realm of programs, policies, products that are available to these firms. And so you'll note, we know that retail is a particularly important part of the economies, but the retail sector in general tends to not be kind to small firms. The retail business model involves either sort of last mile small shops typically, or very much larger economies of scale shops. And so there is also work that's focusing on small firms. I mentioned earlier the Corner Shop Diaries and some other work happening around the world. And so we decided to focus the small firm diaries on a couple of industries where it really is plausible that a firm could grow from 2 to 10 to 15 employees within a reasonable time frame with reasonable support and increase in productivity, gain productivity necessary to pay higher wages. And so finally, we're going to be producing a great deal of material based on this work. In each country, we'll be profiling a number of the firms that we're studying. We'll also be issuing what we call issue briefs around specific issues in each country that we're discovering in the research that matter. We'll be doing sort of more informal blog style and video communications along the way, as well as producing reports that for each country that detail what we've found in that country and the barriers that we've discovered and what we've learned, as well as some global synthesis reports that draw together the work that we've done everywhere around the world for policy lessons up in across countries and for multinational actors. I think that takes me to my 20 minutes, and so I will end there, but happy to answer questions or continue. Although I will, Dr. Onyango also has a question here about succession planning. One of the things that we do have in the study, Dr. Onyango, is we will continue to follow firms that close or the owner dies or is incapacitated, so that we can discover what happens to both the employees and the households of the owners in their of those firms. And so we haven't specifically anticipated. It seems a little strange to say, we don't want bad things to happen, but we designed the study with the expectation that we will be able to see some firms that have extreme difficulties from shocks, and then to be able to understand what happens to those firms when a disaster strikes.
Thank you, Professor Ogden. It's just that we do not have a way of clapping for you, but very well done. That's a very excellent presentation. I would like now to welcome Dr. Amrik Heya, who will now take us through her presentation on the same study, but with a Kenyan perspective. Dr. Amrik Heya, before Dr. Amrik Heya starts, I would just like to recognize the presence of Dr. Ruth Onyango, who's just asked a very important question, and I think it's been handled. I would also like to recognize Dr. Pamen Olenarikai, Dr. Alan Mugambi of JKUAT, and Madam Elizabeth Njau of Nairobi City County Government. Welcome all. So Dr. Amrik Heya, please proceed and make your presentation.
Thank you very much, Fred. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, I think we can see your screen.
Great. Now I can see that I'm starting at the end of the presentation, which is, you know, always an interesting way to start. So let me go back to the beginning. Basically my sort of part in this is to give us a brief overview of the Kenya study. And I wanted to start by giving us a bit of a sense of the context of MSEs more broadly here in Kenya. So some of you may have seen this slide before from previous presentation, but from our latest data from FinAccess, and that's shortly to be updated because we're launching a new FinAccess survey at the end of November, we see that about 20% of the population over 16 actually earn a livelihood from some form of business activity. That's over 5 million Kenyans. The majority actually female. It's a particularly important area for women's livelihoods. And we see that the businesses are concentrated in wholesale and retail trade. But as Tim's mentioned, we also want to look at some of these sectors where perhaps there's not such a large representation across firms, but where we might see more concentration of perhaps growth-orientated firms, including manufacturing, agriculture, transport, and so forth. The biggest segment here, actually, you'll see again, is young women who are, sorry, just go back once more, between the ages of 26, sorry, the screen is slightly hidden because I've got a bar across it, yes, 26 to 35. Yeah, okay, so to continue then, 1 second. I think, you know, Tim and Tamara and others have all discussed, Fred as well, you know, the importance of MSEs. I don't think I really need to emphasize that here, but really to say that, you know, they do span this spectrum of being kind of, you know, deeply involved in local economies and having a very strong contribution to household welfare, which is one of the reasons why we're so interested in them. But also particularly for small firms straddling that sort of nexus between welfare, contributions to household welfare and being very embedded in household economies, but also sort of being involved in sectors which actually have the potential to really contribute to growth. Some of the data from the State Department of Industrialization actually also tells us that they contribute 20 businesses as a whole, MSEs as a whole, contribute 24% of Kenya's GDP. And they're also sort of embedded in supply chains and value chains that have a lot of importance and value for local economies. So from the MSME survey conducted by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics in 2016, so this is quite old data now, we can see that firms are having between 2 and 20 employees, which are the firms that we're actually targeting here in Kenya for the small firms diaries, make up about 14% of the kind of business population more generally, the majority still being at the very micro end of the spectrum. So that's just to give us a bit of a sense of sort of where our firms here in Kenya might be located vis-a-vis a larger spectrum of small firms, of MSEs. I also wanted to just sort of give us a little bit of a snapshot of some of the recent data that we've been conducting, that we've been collecting on businesses to study the impacts of COVID-19. And here we see that, obviously businesses, as we would expect, have been pretty hard hit by the pandemic, especially in the lockdown period where we had lots of economic restrictions in order to contain the spread of the pandemic last year between April and July. We see that this year, with more recent data coming in from July, that we have a number who've actually bounced back and are earning, above perhaps even or at their pre-COVID revenues. It's over a third of businesses, about 38% of businesses who we can consider have bounced back. But that still leaves a very large number of businesses, over 40%, who are earning less than half of what they were earning pre-COVID. So we have to remember that, this study is taking place in a context where the entire economy has actually just experienced a very large shock. And I think there'll be some quite interesting findings on resilience and potential to sort of overcome shocks really within our small firms diaries population. And there'll probably be quite a lot of variety within that population in terms of those who are more and less resilient to the effects of the pandemic and other similar shocks, or other shocks, I should say. I hope there's no similar shock. So again, I just wanted to also bring up one more slide from that study as well, just to show the main sources of support that businesses mentioned in helping them to either reopen or to bounce back. And these, again, were mainly social networks. And I think that's not just applicable to micro businesses, it actually is applicable to businesses well into our category of small firms as well, where social networks, the informal economy is a hugely, hugely important resource still, from all sorts of different perspectives, not just financing. And again, some businesses really did benefit from some of the government measures as well that were put in place to support small firms to recover from the pandemic last year. But again, a vast majority were not able to benefit from those measures. And that's, again, particularly due to some of the challenges around small firms, including their informality, their decentralization. They're very hard to reach with with these kinds of measures. The way that they deal with liquidity, especially in high-risk environments where they may be quite reluctant to take formal loans or take the risk of formal loans. And also, of course, the particular hit that small firms experienced during COVID, which was a real hit to their markets, to demand. So without being able to sort of maintain demand in the wider economy, through safety nets and other measures, we actually will also sort of see that small firms themselves, or firms in general, are put in a much riskier position. So that's just to give you a snapshot of some of the data coming out from FinAccess, but also some of our recent work to track some of the FinAccess sample actually from 2019 to see what happened to them during the pandemic. Onto the Kenya Small Firms Diaries sample. I just want to give us a quick view of where the study's at here in Kenya. We've actually completed most of the preparatory phase for the study. And in fact, it's quite exciting that this week we're actually starting fieldwork with the firms that we've actually managed to recruit. We're still also undergoing a bit more recruitment. We haven't recruited quite all our firms yet, but we are starting fieldwork this week. So that's very exciting. And the study is set to run into 2023, where we'll be getting our final kind of outputs and reports. And we'll certainly be looking forward to having more convenings of this nature at the beginning of 2023 and possibly even end of 2022 when the study has been completed in October next year. Again, to sort of return to some of the points about the locations of the firms that Tim made, we've selected 3 sites across Kenya, and one of the, we've tried to select them to sort of give us a bit of a spread across the country. So that's Nairobi, Kwale, and Kisumu counties. And within those sites, we've sort of tried to select firms within an area that is logistically feasible to study. We've also tried to prioritize women-owned firms, but they have been quite difficult to recruit, especially in that small firms niche, because many women are concentrated in that micro level layer of the business sector. And we've focused on the three main sectors that Tim mentioned already, which is agro-processing, light manufacturing, and other services. So we've got about 25% of our firms in agro-processing, about over 50%, perhaps predictably, in light manufacturing, because it's actually easier to find those concentrations in areas such as metalwork, woodwork, tailoring, and so forth. And then we have some from these other services, which I'll describe a little bit in a minute. 25% of our sample are women-owned firms, 24% actually. And then we also have 10% of firms that are owned by couples, and that will also be very interesting from a gender perspective to sort of see how is it different, you know, for women being a kind of a female-owned firm versus working together with often would be a spouse or a male partner. The majority of our firms have 2 employees or 3 employees. Yes, and then just to give us a little bit of a sense of sort of a bit more of a detailed sense of our sample in agro-processing, partly because we're involved in the blue economy or in meat preservation and processing. We're quite excited about some of our fish processing firms that include some women who are processing sardines right down in Banga, which is right in the southernmost tip of our country, who are operating in quite a sort of a small village there, but who are doing some quite impressive work, you know, businesses in terms of sort of processing sardines and selling them to, you know, fairly wide market. And that's actually quite recent, so we're going to be quite curious to know how those firms came about. We've also got some firms involved in food preparation of various kinds, and a few firms involved in poultry and fruit juices, canned food. Light manufacturing, again, we've got a number of firms kind of quite predictably really kind of involved in carpentry and metalwork, which is also quite important for the housing sector as well as the broader construction sector. And as you know, affordable housing or housing is quite a priority for the government. So we were pleased to be able to get those firms in. But in addition, and particularly to recruit more women, we've got firms involved in garment production and leather production. In the services sector, there's a rather more eclectic group of firms, but they're sort of more concentrated on repairs, and particularly these sort of motorcycle boda type repair garages, which are again quite important given the huge you know, growth of bodas and motorcycles within the economy. Also mobile phone repairs, again quite an important growing niche there, and then wholesale retail as well, including some hardware stores, which will connect us into some of the supply chains as well for the construction industry. And we've got a few firms involved in printing as well, which is also quite interesting, particularly in the Kisumu area. Of our firms, again, we've got, you know, of the women, many of them are in the light manufacturing industry. And that's, again, particularly because of including tailoring and garment production. So yeah, there we go. That was my first slide, and that's my last slide. So with that, I mean, I think hopefully that gives everybody a bit of a snapshot of the Kenya chapter of the study. And just to sort of say, you know, we are so excited here in Kenya to be able to be part of this study and to be working closely with the team from New York, as well as our colleagues in the SME advisory and our other policy colleagues from the State Department of Industrialization and so forth. So we're very excited to be part of the study and also to have all of you here with us